Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the grand finale. Hopefully there won't be any fireworks.
Fireworks.
Our opening prayer tonight, I have quite a collection of old prayer books that I just pick up here and there. This is one called The Book of Private Prayer by Dom Hubert van Zeller. He appears to have been a Belgian monk, and it was published in the early 1960s. If we are in all things identical with our pagan neighbors, one with them in our moral standards, our views on current subjects, our amusements, ambitions, and taboos, we are irreligious people. If the only difference between me and my non-Catholic friends is to be found in my choice of fish on one day of the week and the half hour I spend at Mass every Sunday, then it looks as though I am taking my religious obligation very much too lightly. Certainly I am not living by faith. I am not making the gospel life my own. I am not taking my stand on the life of Christ. Lord, grant me a lively sense of my Catholic inheritance. Let me not cheapen the good thing which through no merit of mine I have been privileged to enjoy. Prevent me from adjusting myself to the prevailing unbelief, to the outlook which puts expedience before principle and human well-being before everything else. Give me a Catholic conscience which will enable me to judge, in those borderline cases which are bound to come up in social life, what is your will. Do not allow me always to take the lax view in questions of abstinence, the Sunday obligation, the practice of Lent, and other religious observances. Give me the courage which will enable me to present the Catholic case to non-Catholics and to defend its claims. Remind me that it is part of my religious obligation to know what the Church teaches, and also by word and example to expound that teaching. Since my most precious possession in this world is my faith, I pray that I may cherish it and not endanger it. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you.
All right. Lingering questions from last week? Not from 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks.
All right. I think chances are good we'll get through tonight's material and be able to get those 2 words we didn't get to from 2 weeks ago. So let's see if we can do it. Tonight's theme is minimum qualifications, the precepts of the Church. What are the precepts of the Church? Well, let's start with what is a precept. It means a rule of conduct. These are also sometimes in older books known as the commandments of the Church, to be distinguished from the commandments of God. How many are there? That's a tricky question, as we'll see going on tonight. Catechism of the Catholic Church, beginning in number 2041, lists 5. But historically, that number has varied at different times and in different places. You'll find some lists in the Middle Ages that had 10 or 12 of them. In more recent history, you'll find some places have 5, some have 6, some have 7. Sometimes that's because they take one and they split it into 2, or 2 and they merge them into 1. Sometimes it's because they make a rule out of what is basically just the obvious. Like the last one will be, and don't do anything else that the Church says you shouldn't do. As if that needs to be a commandment all of its own. The Catechism says, the obligatory character of these positive laws decreed by the pastoral authorities is meant to guarantee to the faithful the very necessary minimum in the spirit of prayer and moral effort in the growth of love of God and neighbor. I was finding as I went through the definitions for tonight, all kinds of words that we've been learning over the last 5 weeks keep coming up. This gives me the chance to say, you're lucky I ran out of time because there was going to be a quiz. I told the ladies at coffee this morning there wouldn't be, and so Jen did some little extra homework, and while I was trying to do serious canon law work in Ogdensburg, she sent me a link to coloring pages of the 5 precepts.
Was that one you were at work?
Yes. It was only going to cost me 99 cents if I wanted to download them to print, but I spared you. These are positive laws. Remember when we talked about law last week? So these are laws that are stated, not deduced from what's going on around us. And where are these laws coming from? By the pastoral authorities. So we could say the magisterium, as we talked about a few weeks back. And they are to guarantee the very necessary minimum. So we hear things like, oh, commandments of the church, these more things we have to do. This is what you need to do to just squeak by. Okay, so these are not meant to be huge and onerous things. This is, if you ever hear reference to, are they a practicing Catholic or are they a Catholic in good standing? These are the things you need to be in good standing. Okay? The description of them from the Catechism points to the fact that they are obligatory in character. Does obligation really need a definition? I don't think so. I did look up where it came from. It means to be bound to, literally, to be like tied up together with. So an obligation is something that we're tied up in. It's what's expected of us. All of these are obligatory on Catholics. Another important word through the course of this is dispensation. Most of us know what a dispensation is from St. Patrick's Day. Right? If it hits a Friday, we hope the bishop gives a dispensation so we can eat our corned beef. What is a dispensation? In the Latin, it originally means to pay out. You hear pence in there, like pennies? So to distribute or to disperse. In the end, it means an exemption, license to do what is forbidden or to omit what is required. So, because these are obligations, to be free of the obligation, one would need a dispensation. All right, so the first precept of the church: you shall attend Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation and rest from servile labor. Pretty much a restatement of the third commandment, of observing the Sabbath and keeping it holy. A couple of things that come under that and are helpful for us to understand how to live this rule and why it's there. The rule itself says Mass on Sundays. And I'm sure a few people said, but I only go on Saturday. What if I don't only go on Saturday and I don't go on Sunday? What can be helpful is to speak of the main day of obligation as the Lord's Day. Okay? That's a custom of referring to it as the Dies Domini, the day of the Lord, from the very early days of Christian. The name Sunday is based on the sun and honoring the sun as a god. We don't stop and think about that, but all of our days are named after various gods, Roman, Greek, or even some of the Norse gods. Christians would have bristled a little bit to have to say we worship on a day that's dedicated to a false god, so they began to refer to it as the Lord's Day. Most of these precepts are so old and so deeply ingrained, we can't point to like a time or an author who was the first one to say you must, thou shalt or thou shalt not. In this one in particular, it goes back to the apostles. Remember we talked about the capital T tradition? This is definitely part of that because we already see it in the Acts of the Apostles. Okay, the Christian community is gathering to break the bread, the name they used most often for the Eucharist. And it's interesting, if you look carefully at the Acts of the Apostles, when they do it. It's usually during the night between Saturday and Sunday. I think, well, that's a little strange. I thought there was nothing more Catholic than church on Sunday morning. Thing was, the weekend hadn't been invented yet. Literally. The Jewish people had a Sabbath, but if they were living in a foreign culture or being oppressed by a foreign ruler, they had no interest in preserving this religious observance every week. And Sunday was just kind of like our Monday. It was the first day of the week for everybody else. So unless it was a holiday of some sort, it was a work day like any other. And so for very practical reasons, the Christians had to meet when they could. When they could as far as their working lives allowed, but also when they could in a discreet way that wasn't going to draw the attention of hostile eyes. So if you read carefully again in the Acts of the Apostles, you will see them often gathering to break bread during the night between Saturday and Sunday. This was also based on the Jewish understanding of time. When would we say that a day starts? If you don't have a clock. Sunrise. The Jewish calculation of when a day starts is sunset. We'll hear that reading from Genesis at the beginning of the Easter Vigil about the days of creation, and the end of every day of creation says, evening came and morning followed the first day. Notice it doesn't say morning came and evening followed. This has been the way Jewish people have computed their days to the present day. And Christians, true to their Jewish roots, have maintained that. So our celebration of Sundays and major feasts starts the evening before. In the Liturgy of the Hours, the prayers that priests and religious pray every day for Sundays and major feasts, our observance of it begins the evening before. In a certain way, it's like it's such a big deal we can't get it all in 24 hours, so we're going to take a day and a half. Okay? So that's where we get this notion of the anticipated Mass, which isn't really a good name for it. It's part of our celebration of the Lord's Day. It's all encompassed. If it's not, then you need to go back to church on Sunday. So, is it part of the Lord's Day? Yes, Father. Okay. Let's see, is there anything else we want to do there? Why Sundays? You got it, John. Because it's the day of the Lord's resurrection. Every Sunday is meant to be a little Easter, or you might say Easter is a big Sunday. All right? We are celebrating not just the first day of the week, we are celebrating the first day of the new creation. The world is different from that day forward. And so we gather on this, the first day, to remember the founding moment of our religion. So the precept says you have to attend Mass on Sundays, the Lord's Day, and holy days of obligation. We've already figured out what an obligation is, but what do we mean by a holy day? Well, let's start with the idea of a feast. This is another one of those words, when you look up where it comes from, they basically say a feast is a feast. It's such an old word, we don't really have other words to go with it. A holiday, a festal banquet. The roots of the word are related to some Latin words for joyful, merry, holy, and temple. In the Catholic Church, we have a range of feasts. This gets a little confusing. I'm only going to do the ones on the current calendar because the ones on the old calendar are even more complicated and I haven't figured that all out yet. I just look at what the calendar says and that's what we're doing. But on the current calendar, the highest level of feast is called a solemnity. The word solemn, these are our most solemn observances. And this is where it gets confusing. The second level of feast is called a feast. Okay, so they are all feasts, but feast is the second level down. Then there's a memorial. Then there's an optional memorial, very creative naming. And then finally there's a commemoration. Okay? So every feast is assigned a rank, and that rank can be what is observed in the universal church, but it might vary from place to place. So, for example, during Lent, we have St. Patrick. St. Patrick on the calendar is an, don't shoot the messenger, optional memorial. Well, sorry. On the general calendar for Catholics around the world, St. Patrick is an optional memorial. Because it falls during Lent, and the observance of Lent trumps most everything else, if March 17th follows on an ordinary weekday of Lent, it becomes a commemoration. Okay, so there will be like this brief little message of St. Patrick, mention of St. Patrick in the Mass, but that's the extent of the celebration. But if you're in a church named after St. Patrick, this commemoration, the lowest level, jumps up to a solemnity. Because it's the namesake of this church and of this community. And so it gets celebrated with all the fanfare. Solemnities, because they're the highest level, if they are impeded by another celebration, so another solemnity that's going to kick it off the roster, like, say, the 5th Sunday of Lent, then you can transfer it. Because it's such a big deal, you still should celebrate it. And so whoever's in charge of the local calendar, so in a parish that would be the pastor, or in a diocese that would be the bishop, can move it to a day where it can be celebrated as it deserves. So that's why last Monday in Colton, it was officially St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. And we did the Mass with all the bells and whistles. We had a Gloria and the special readings and all the stuff, because it was the highest level of feast. It gives you just a little, again, peek behind the curtain of all the ins and outs of how these things go. There are tables of precedent in the front of the missal to help guide a priest through what you do if you've got a conflict between different things going on, to figure out what you can and can't celebrate at any time. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Today's the Annunciation, but it's not.
But it's not.
Is it moved or is it gone?
Yes, so the days of Holy Week are right up there at the top level. Nothing messes with those.
So is it moving or is it?
So it is transferred to the first available day. Now the first available day this year is April 8th. So we get to Easter. And remember I said important days get a day and a half?
They get 8.
Really, really, really important days get 8 days that we call an octave. And nothing messes with the octave of Easter either. So that takes us through the end of Divine Mercy Sunday. The next day is free, and so the day of the eclipse will be the Annunciation this year. So it gets transferred. The same thing happens to St. Joseph if he falls into Holy Week, because that's also a solemnity. Doesn't happen quite so often with St. Joseph, but it's not unheard of with the Annunciation. Fascinating thing about the Annunciation. Today, March 25th, in the early church, was believed by many to have been the actual date of Christ's crucifixion. And because March 25th was the date of Christ's crucifixion, that's why they set today as the Feast of the Annunciation. The thinking being, because it was common belief in the ancient world, that great men, I'm assuming women too, but in the language of the time I only see it written, great men lived out the full round of their years. They would die on the day they were conceived. And you're not going to find a greater man than Jesus Christ. So it was the logical presupposition that he would have died on the day he'd been conceived. And so March 25th was honored as the day of his death and of the Annunciation, and it's from that, and not the other way around, that December 25th becomes observed as the feast of his birth.
Right. That makes
And most people would assume, oh, they just set Christmas, and then they counted back and added this feast later. So all the times you hear people say, oh, Christmas was really a pagan festival for the rebirth of the Son, and the Christians just took it over for the birth of Jesus, hogwash.
Yeah.
Okay, it had nothing to do with any of that. Everybody celebrates something at the time of the winter solstice. So it's just human nature to celebrate, oh, the days are getting longer. Don't we all celebrate when the days start getting longer? So, yeah, that's how we ended up with some of the dates on the calendar. Kind of cool to know all these things too, right? That's why today is also not just the Feast of the Annunciation, or would be, the Feast of Saint Dismas, the good thief. Because, of course, he died the same day as Jesus, and saints' days are traditionally the days they died.
How come they're still in March and Christ got moved back to December? What happened there?
No, today would be, if it weren't Holy Week,
Oh, okay.
the Feast of the Annunciation, of his conception.
Okay.
And then the birth is in December.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I understand now.
I don't want to have to explain the details. 9 months.
I'm getting out of here.
We're going with 9 months.
But wait, I'm sorry, but their death did not happen on the same day or something? I'm sorry, I'm not following you with the thief.
The thief was the thief who died next to Jesus.
Right.
So he would have died the same day Jesus did, March 25th.
Okay.
And so he is on the calendar for today as well.
Father, now the Annunciation, if that's celebrated today, how come April 8th is observed, Annunciation if it's today?
Right, because today is Holy Week, and we
So
don't
that's-
celebrate any additional feasts during Holy Week. Holy Week trumps everything else, so it gets bumped.
That would go into,
So Jesus is going to be a preemie this Christmas
ah,
by a couple of weeks.
Father, the Epiphany is the same way, January 6th.
Well, we're going to get there.
Oh, you're gonna, okay, I'm not.
All right. I mean, I can sit down, John, if you want to teach.
Oh, you're doing good.
So we're going to jump from feast to holy day. Of course, every feast is a holy day, every holy day is a feast, but we use the word holy day in a particular sense as Catholics. Holy day, it's good to remember, is where we get our word holiday, not the other way around. So the idea of holiday comes from holy days. Holy days were not just religious festivals with special prayers at church, but they were days of exemption from work and for recreation. So holy days were the original holidays. And if you look at European calendars still, some holy days remain holidays, even in places where people aren't all that Catholic anymore. So, Pentecost Monday. Nobody gives any attention to Pentecost Monday except in France, because it's a holiday. A holdover from a very, very different time. We here in the States, other than Good Friday and Christmas, don't really coordinate holy days and holidays when you stop to think about it. But that's where it comes from. You will find in the Code of Canon Law this list of holy days of obligation, also known as, interestingly, days of precept. The Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Epiphany, the Ascension, Corpus Christi, Mary the Mother of God, her Immaculate Conception, her Assumption, Saint Joseph, Saints Peter and Paul, and all saints. So there are, that was 10, right? 10 holy days of obligation for the universal church. Now you're probably thinking, but we don't do that one, and I've never heard of that one.
Yeah.
However, the next part of the canon says, the bishops' conference may, with the prior approval of the apostolic see, meaning the Pope, suppress certain holy days of obligation or transfer them to a Sunday. So, different countries, the bishops of that country will get together and have the slate of holy days for that country. I believe they can even add to the list. So Ireland, St. Patrick might be a holy day of obligation, not a mere commemoration. So here in the United States, we do not observe St. Joseph or the apostles Peter and Paul as holy days of obligation. We have several holy days that in this country we always transfer. Epiphany and Corpus Christi. The Epiphany, traditionally on January 6th, we always bump to the Sunday. And Corpus Christi, traditionally on a Thursday, the day of the Last Supper, we transfer to the following Sunday. So it's still a holy day, but it's on a day you already had an obligation to go to Mass. Now here's where it gets even more complicated. In 1991, the bishops of the United States agreed to what I'm going to call the Saturday-Monday rule. So that's for 3 of the remaining holy days. Mary, Mother of God on January 1st, Assumption of Mary on August 15th, and All Saints on November 1st. For those 3, if that date falls on Saturday or Monday, there's no obligation to attend Mass. I believe their thing was, in a land where the holy days aren't holidays, this isn't meant to be about adding a burden to people, to find the time to leave work, to leave school and get to church. It's meant to be a reason to celebrate and rest. So, rather than having people come to Mass 2 days in a row, we'll lift the obligation. I think that was their goal. I think what happened is just mass confusion. Is it a holy day or not, Father? Well, it is a holy day, but there's no obligation. Well, what does that mean?
Go to Mass.
Go to Mass, yes. Just go to Mass every day, and they don't have to worry about it. And then, in 1999, the bishops of the U.S. got together, and they talked about Ascension. The Feast of the Ascension, 40 days after Easter, is traditionally celebrated on a Thursday. But the bishops of the United States got together, in line with a lot of other countries, and said, if the local province of bishops, which for most of us is state by state, get together, they can transfer the Ascension to the following Sunday. So, all of the United States transfers Ascension Thursday to Sunday, which gets confusing with the language, and it's no longer 40 days at that point, except the provinces of Boston, Hartford, New York, Omaha, and Philadelphia. Basically the Northeast, where you have a lot of Catholic tradition, and Nebraska.
Way out. Nebraska.
So holy days can be a little complicated. A lot of that has to do with, again, reckoning with the fact that our holy days are not holidays for most of us. And the idea is not to make it an undue burden. It should be a day for rejoicing.
How is it a day, how is it a burden? It just seems like it gets dumbed down over the years more and more.
Yeah, I look at a lot of our families where the kids are in school and mom and dad are working, and finding a Mass time that works out between practices because none of the rest of the world has stopped like it kind of does on Sunday. It's a challenge. And then to feel like, okay, I've committed a mortal sin if I don't find a way to work all this out. That's where the burden comes in. Now you could just say, okay, I'm not going to work this day, or we're going to take the kids out of school this day, but then that has all kinds of other repercussions. On Christmas, it's not really an issue because everything shuts down. And so we're able to do what we ought to do. Come to church, rest and recreate, and it works.
On Good Friday, when I was growing up, everything closed down. I mean,
Yeah, it used to be,
you know, all the
Yeah.
stores were
Sure.
closed, the bars, the restaurants, everything was closed at least
Yep.
until 3 o'clock, from
Yep.
1 to 3 or,
You'll notice though, Good Friday
but they changed.
wasn't on that list.
yeah.
Yeah, but they used to be.
No, it didn't used to be.
Oh, again?
Good Friday has never been a holy day of obligation.
No, not.
Neither is Ash Wednesday.
Can't go to
Yeah.
Mass
Yeah,
on
right,
Friday.
okay.
No, and you can't go to Mass on Good Friday, so that's part of it, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there used to be more cultural support for these sorts of things. I mean, because even now, Sunday is, people are having a hard time finding time with sports and all this other sort of stuff. Now, I will agree with you, priorities are an issue here. But when you're dealing with kids' education and a family's livelihood, it's a little different than just what time is practice.
Used to be the blue law as well.
Yeah, Sundays, it used to be, yeah, they done away with all,
Yeah, you couldn't have, well, no alcohol till noon, and
Yeah.
you couldn't even sell it at the, you know.
yeah, Sunday blue law.
Yeah.
So,
Changed all.
many countries have, we're never gonna get to those two words if we can. Many countries have really reduced the list, more so than the United States. The United States is kind of a holdout for the number of holy days it has. In Canada, I believe the only two are Christmas and January 1st, Mary Mother of God. I think all the others get transferred to a Sunday or are not observed. But again, it's an acknowledgement of the context in which we're trying to live the faith. So, that's holy days in a nutshell. Our focus so far has been on the Lord's Day and holy days. We are to get to Mass, but there was more to the rule, right?
Yeah,
Obligation to attend Mass and to rest
yeah.
from servile labor.
Right.
And everybody's like, what? Rest? Yeah, that's part of the commandment. Our English word rest comes from Old English for a bed or a couch. That somehow seems appropriate.
Yeah,
What does the Code of Canon Law say about this rest? Because that's a pretty broad term. It says, the faithful are also to abstain from such work or business that would inhibit the worship to be given to God, the joy proper to the Lord's Day, or the due relaxation of mind and body. So if you're doing something on a Sunday or a holy day that gets in the way of those things, that's where we're treading on thin ice. Now the church isn't going to give a list of, for example, because it can vary a great deal.
so,
If you're a doctor,
yeah.
it might be restful on Sunday to mow the lawn. If you work in yard care for a living, mowing on Sunday is a whole different experience. So you have to put it in context of the individual's life. The farmer digging in the dirt on Sunday is his labor. But someone who works in an office all week might find working in the garden perfectly recreational for a Sunday afternoon. So that's why you can't have the hard and fast do's and don'ts list.
You're a business owner, would it be a good idea to close your business on a Sunday?
It's going to depend on the nature of your business. So that's where we get back to when is one excused from this precept of the church? There are built-in exceptions.
Yeah,
One can be excused by grave inconvenience. Okay? Now, when the church uses grave, it means severe inconvenience. So we're talking about there's a blizzard and it's not safe. You are excused from getting to Sunday Mass. That's a grave inconvenience. Also by the special nature of a person's work. So the hospital has to stay open. The policeman has to still be on duty. The cows still have to be milked. There are certain things which must continue on for the good function and the safety of society. So those people are excused, at least from the restroom labor, and possibly even from the obligation to attend Mass, because of the nature of their work. None of these obligations are meant to call us to do the near impossible. They're all about the minimum we need to keep on a good living relationship with God and His church. So it's going to vary depending on the sort of business. And arguments can be made in many different ways. The grocery store. I mean, people got to eat, but you could buy your food the other 6 days of the week. But not everybody in society is Christian.
Oh, yeah.
It gets complicated.
How does the church define servile?
Well, that was, I don't have a definition of, well, I guess it would be a definition. Any work or business that inhibits the worship to be given to God, the joy proper to the Lord's day, or the due relaxation of mind and body.
So there's servile.
I can't get much more specific than that. Instead, what the church generally does is, here's the goal of the rest. This day is meant to be a gift. Please receive it as such.
Gift. So that's sweet.
Okay, first precept. Second precept. You shall confess your sins at least once a year.
Well, we got Easter duty.
I don't know there's a whole lot to explain there. Except, it's interesting. I'm giving you the wording as it's found in the Catechism. You would think that would be the clearest, most precise, but it's not. Because what canon law says is all the faithful who have reached the age of discretion are bound faithfully to confess their grave sins at least once a year. So their serious sins or their mortal sins. Okay? Venial sins do not have to be confessed. And so if you are not conscious of any grave sin, then you are not obliged to approach confession. Now, if you're out of the habit for too long, that can also be problematic. But again, we're talking at bargain basement levels here. If you're aware of mortal sin, at least once a year. Questions? All right, number 2 is intimately tied up with number 3. You shall receive the sacrament of the Eucharist at least during the Easter season.
Yeah.
Okay, the so-called Easter duty.
Right.
And the reason I say 2 and 3 are connected is because if you are conscious of mortal sin, you shouldn't be going to communion without first going to confession. And if you're expected to go to communion at least once a year, well then at least once a year for confession is a good idea too. So how do we end up with this precept? This is the one that's easiest to track some history on. Beginning all the way back in the 6th century, various local councils already felt the need to mandate to Christians that they go to communion on the principal feasts of the year, namely Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost. Now, it's kind of sad that within just a few centuries' time, people are receiving the Eucharist so rarely that 3 times a year is what they're having to call people up to, but here we are. Those were local regulations. The Fourth Lateran Council, so this was held in Rome in the year 1215. It was an ecumenical council. We've talked about those. All the bishops of the world got together, and they legislated for the whole world a universal mandate. But they reduced it from the 3 feasts to just 1 at Easter. And they didn't say just on Easter Sunday, but they defined an Easter season. And so this mandate from the Fourth Lateran Council was confirmed and restated by the Council of Trent after the Protestant Reformation, and then it was included in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. What do they mean by the Easter season? This was an interesting rabbit hole. Universally, by Easter season, they mean from Palm Sunday, yesterday, to Low Sunday, which is the Sunday after Easter. We now call it Divine Mercy Sunday. So there was a 2-week span, 3 Sundays, where you were expected to come to Mass. You were still expected to go to Mass every Sunday, but you were expected to receive communion in that span of time. Does that sound a little different than anything you've ever read about the Easter duty?
Yeah, a little bit.
It sure did to me.
Yeah.
Well, here's what happens. In the United States, the first plenary council of Baltimore in 1829. So a plenary council is when all the bishops of a region get together, not all the bishops of the world. So these were all the bishops of the United States gathered in Baltimore, because Baltimore was the first diocese of the United States. And they had to work out some kinks in the system for how to be Catholic in these United States. Now in 1829, we didn't have all the churches we have today. The Diocese of Ogdensburg was decades from being invented. Our bishop was still in New York City. So having a 2-week window to do your Easter duty could be rather difficult, especially here in the hinterlands where you might not be able to get out through the snow during those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So they petitioned Rome for a broader Easter season here in the United States. And that definition, which Pope Pius VIII granted, is what still applies here because the law has never been changed. And so in the United States, you can fulfill your Easter duty from the first Sunday of Lent until Trinity Sunday, the Sunday after Pentecost. Vastly longer period of time than 2 weeks. We're talking like 100 days. Again, it's the same thinking that goes into calculating how many holy days. This is not to make practicing your faith onerous. This is about making that accessible and possible. So far, so good? Thank the First Council of Baltimore. You know the Baltimore Catechisms?
Yeah.
That's where they get their name. It was approved by the councils of Baltimore and published as the Catechism for the United States.
Yeah.
Have you ever wondered why it was called that of all things? We have not had a plenary council in this country, I don't think, since the Baltimore ones back in the 1800s, where all the bishops have gotten together to work on legislation for the whole nation. They do some things through the bishops' conference, but that's different than a plenary council would be. The 4th precept of the church: you shall observe the days of fasting and abstinence established by the church. So what are those, and what are fasting and abstinence? Canon 1251. Abstinence from meat or from some other food as determined by the Bishops' Conference is to be observed on all Fridays, unless a solemnity should fall on a Friday. Abstinence and fasting are to be observed on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday.
Right.
That's the general rule for the Universal Church. Now again, you're probably thinking, but I thought it was just during Lent. The next canon. Actually, it's 2 canons later. The Bishops' Conference can determine more particular ways in which fasting and abstinence are observed. In place of abstinence or fasting, it can substitute, in whole or in part, other forms of penance, especially works of charity and exercises of piety. So the bishops of this country, back in, I think it was 1966, determined that they would maintain the Fridays of Lent, but the Fridays of the rest of the year Catholics were still required to do penance, but they could substitute another penance for abstinence from meat. Now, I think by and large people didn't catch that second part, but that's the rule, and it's still what's on the books. So we talked, I don't know if it was last week, 2 weeks ago, some countries have gone back to all Fridays, some countries never abandoned all Fridays, some countries have abandoned all but Good Friday, which is up in Canada. So there are very different ways of interpreting this depending on your context. Between those two canons, there's one that says, the law of abstinence binds those who have completed their 14th year. The law of fasting binds those who have attained the age of majority, meaning 18, until the beginning of their 60th year. Pastors of souls and parents are to ensure that even those who by reason of their age are not bound by the law of fasting and abstinence are taught the true meaning of penance. So, concessions for age: too young to understand, too old for it to be healthy. We won't require it, but that doesn't mean you're not obliged to do penance. Penance is obligatory of every Christian by the law of God. What was the first thing Jesus preached? Repent and believe in the gospel. Penance is part of being a Christian. Abstinence and fasting are ways we do penance all together, which is an important thing, but there are specific rules surrounding that. Did you notice abstinence from meat or from some other food? The Bishops' Conference could determine that going without meat isn't quite the sacrifice that it was understood to be at another time. If you're in a culture of vegetarians, for example, this is completely meaningless. So maybe abstinence from carrots every Friday is what they have to do. I don't know. I don't have any examples of places that have done that, but if you are in a fishing culture where you ate fish all the time, fish on Friday isn't a thing. So that's the abstinence sides of things. Fasting. The word fast in English comes from Old German and Gothic. You don't hear too many things from the Gothic language. Originally meaning to hold firmly. We still use that expression, to hold something fast. To hold firmly then becomes to have firm control of yourself. And that becomes to keep or to observe. And that becomes to abstain from food as a religious observance. Isn't that interesting how we still say, I'm going to keep the fast? Language has a way of really hanging on. So, what does fasting mean? I get this question all the time. What do you think fasting means? You don't eat. It's pretty straightforward. Or it should be. If your doctor tells you you must fast before this blood work, what does that mean? You don't eat. But when the church says you should fast on Good Friday, everybody's like, but how much can I eat? It's like, okay, we're having a failure to communicate here. So, again, out of an understanding that days of fast may not be days when everybody can avoid work. And so, you're working in the factory, and if you're fasting and you get weak, you're a danger to yourself and others, for example. The church, over time, made more and more concessions on what fasting could mean. I'm going to read a little bit from this chart, because this was fascinating when I found this at the beginning of Lent. Some of you have heard a little bit of this on the Wednesday luncheons in Colton. Back in the 5th century, the Council of Nicaea, when they legislated about fasting for Christians, this was the universal practice. Nobody ate or drank anything until after sundown. All of Lent. Not just Fridays. Every day, Sundays included. No meat was eaten, period. And no fish. We're talking bread, vegetables, and water once a day at the end of the day.
Uh-oh.
I never knew.
That was what everybody did. 2 centuries later, there's some exceptions for some fish. You can eat meat on Sunday.
Uh-oh.
You can have some wine.
Why?
Every day.
Things of that sort. You move ahead a few centuries, yeah, you can have something to drink during the day, and it doesn't just have to be water. And yeah, sundown's kind of late. How about 3 p.m.? And then a couple centuries later, well, you can have a small meal during the course of the day to help tide you over, but no more than 2 ounces. And your main meal shouldn't be any earlier than noon. And yeah, fish is okay. And yeah, seafood too. Seafood would be all right.
Wow.
You see how it starts to go? And this continues right up through the 1960s. So when people wonder, why are Catholic rules about fasting so complicated? They were simple. Don't eat.
They were.
And then we were all like, but, and that's how they get complicated. So, what's the current rule? From Pope Paul VI in 1966. The law of fasting allows only 1 full meal a day, but does not prohibit taking some food in the morning and evening, observing, as far as quantity and quality are concerned, approved local custom. And what is the approved local custom here in these United States? When fasting, a person is permitted to eat 1 full meal, as well as 2 smaller meals that together are not equal to a full meal,
Yeah.
which is barely different than any other day of the year. Again, we're talking bargain basement bare minimum. This isn't, okay, I have to eat that much on Good Friday. If you need to, you can eat as much as this. But fasting means you don't eat. Have I made myself clear?
Yeah, you did.
Yes.
My grandfather celebrated one Lent. He said 40 days. He had no meat. 40. I couldn't believe that, but he's an Orthodox. It's a Romanian thing. Told me no meat.
Yep.
40. I couldn't get over. So he couldn't get over me just on Fridays. Not having. He said, John, I did that for 40 days.
Yeah, it used to be no meat, no dairy.
Yeah. And he said, yeah, and I couldn't get over. He couldn't get over our doing it just on.
But again, it's this gradual change. Again, if you think about it, if you're in a fully Catholic culture
Right.
where everybody is doing this, 1, there's the social support for it, but 2, people aren't going to expect things of you during Lent the way they would at the rest of the year because they know, like them, you are fasting.
Right.
And it's a time of year when you're in an agricultural society when there's less going on. So your nutritional needs aren't as high. You're coming down off the fat season of Christmas. You're awaiting the new crops and the slaughter of the winter stock. It kind of fits in the natural ebb and flow of things. In the modern world where every day is like every other day, it doesn't work quite the same way.
Right.
Paul?
I've been in places where there have been exceptions for heavy physical labor, okay, no fasting, and also travelers are not supposedly not put under that obligation. Have you come across that?
I have not seen that spelled out. But again, the church isn't trying to oblige us to the impossible, nor is she trying to put our health at risk. So the changes we see over the centuries are all based on those very practical kind of concerns. And that's why a lot of the exceptions, there were a lot of exceptions for the United States, because our history is pretty much as an industrial nation. And so what was expected of us as an industrialized people was different than what would have been expected in a more agricultural society.
I was just gonna say, another exception was always pregnant nursing mothers.
Sure.
Which meant I got to not fast for 10 years.
That's why Catholics have such big families.
Yeah, right.
Yes, Mary.
When we were over in Italy with the bishop 12 years ago, and we were coming back on a Friday, and he said, not knowing what we were going to be able to eat in Paris at the airport, he gave us a dispensation of eating meat.
Yep. A bishop, of course, can give a general dispensation to those who live in or are passing through his diocese for a particular occasion. Pastors have the authority from canon law to dispense from the obligation for Sundays, holy days, fasting, abstinence. You're all going to be nicer to me now.
I'll be nice.
We can't give a blanket dispensation for anything, but in individual cases, we can. And I do. If people, Father, I'm going to be traveling, I've already checked, there's no way I'm going to be getting Mass, you're dispensed, be at peace. I don't want you to have to worry about that while you're catching your plane. You know, it's reasonable.
Okay.
There was yes, Paul.
Point of interest, in Islam, Ramadan 12-hour fasting, 30 days, sunrise to sunset.
Yep.
But the difference there is they gorge at night. It's just the Ramadan parties are infamous, you know, in most of the Islam.
Oh, at night.
So they prepare themselves well for the daylight hours.
I think the custom of fasting, of not eating before sunset, was something very common in the Mediterranean world, that sense of fasting, and that's why it was a common practice for Christians and Muslims, and we diverged from there. They picked up the evening feast, and then we just kept moving sunset.
Oh, man.
But some of the Eastern churches, I had a Maronite Catholic classmate in the seminary, it was still the traditional practice among the Maronites, you didn't eat till evening. Now, living among us Latin Catholics, it depended on the day. When in Rome, as they say, and we were actually in Rome, so.
Yeah, when in Rome, right? Yeah.
All right. Fifth precept. You shall help to provide for the needs of the church. That's kind of a very general way to say it. The church doesn't specify how or how much, just that we all have a duty to help take care of the material needs of the church. Word I chose to put under here was tithing. An old English word that simply means a tenth. And why a tenth? Well, when we look at the book of Genesis, chapter 14, Abraham has won a battle. He goes to the priest Melchizedek, name you hear every once in a while, and he asks Melchizedek to offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to God and to bless him. And in gratitude for Melchizedek's blessing, Abraham gives him a tenth of all the booty he took from battle. And that's where the custom traces itself back to. There were laws on the church books in various places at various times from the 6th century on, requiring tithing of Christians in a particular region. And by the 8th century, in some places, those laws were enforced by the secular authorities, probably for taking, 1% off the 10. But those laws have been gone everywhere for a very, very long time, and there was nothing ever of the sort here in the U.S. Interesting tidbit, in Germany to this day, every German pays a church tax. And the tax that's taken is given to the church to which they belong. So the German Catholic Church is gobs of money. Much of it coming from Catholics who never go to church. Now you can get around the tax by saying, I left the church. So the church has had to make rules saying, well, if you left the church in the eyes of the government, we're saying you left the church. But that gets complicated.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, you're only Catholic if you can afford to pay up. And that's not the Christian spirit. So it's a mess in Germany. I'll leave it at that. But they have nice things because they've got lots of money.
They got nice.
So that takes us to 5 precepts of the church. There's only 5 that you'll find in the catechism. Anybody remember their catechism days and having more than 5 precepts?
Was there obeying the marriage laws?
Number 6. The Third Plenary Council of Baltimore, the one that gave us the Baltimore Catechism back in 1886, when it published its list of precepts, had a 6th one. Now again, these varied from place to place. It's not like we were going rogue here in the US. There's always been little differences. And it was to observe the church's laws on marriage. So we will take a very brief excursus into Catholic marriage law. One who has been baptized a Catholic or received into the full communion of the Catholic Church, no exception for you, Trent, must observe the prescribed form of matrimony prescribed by the Church for the validity of their marriage. So, a Catholic, whether they're marrying another Catholic or anybody else, has to follow the Catholic form of marriage for the Church to recognize that marriage as valid. This was not always the case. In fact, for most of the Church's history, you could get married in any which old way, and the Church acknowledged if it was 2 Catholics, 2 Christians, it was a sacrament. Why did it change? When did it change? It changed at the Council of Trent in 1563 because of the problems surrounding clandestine marriages. So what makes a marriage in the Roman tradition? I do. You're married. Bride and groom confer the sacrament on one another. That's what makes marriage marriage. They can do that out behind the woodshed, just as well as they can do that at the high altar. If they do it out behind the woodshed, nobody knows they did it. And so they can just say they did it, till things fall apart and they say, well, actually we didn't do it. And then nobody knows what the heck is going on. So you get all kinds of difficulties about parentage, inheritance, divorce and remarriage, all this sort of thing, because there was no rule requiring that anybody had to witness the 2 people exchange consent. You can imagine how quickly this devolves. So, to put an end to the chaos, the Council of Trent said, you are now required to exchange those promises in the presence of the parish priest or his delegate and 2 other witnesses. So all of a sudden now the Church is imposing a particular form on the ceremony. With good reasons to do it, but it has other effects. So now if 2 Catholics go to the Justice of the Peace, there may be too many more witnesses, but the parish priest wasn't there, so the Church doesn't recognize it. Or they show up at the church door, they want to elope. Isn't it romantic? And the priest is the only one home and it's the middle of the night. Can't do it. We need a couple of witnesses. Go wake up the neighbors. So it had some unintended consequences, but I think we can all understand why the Church required there be canonical form.
Father?
Yes.
Basically, marriage, like you said, the priest represents God, so he's really a witness. It's really between the 2.
The priest is an additional witness,
Right.
yes. But he doesn't actually marry them,
Right.
despite the language we use.
Yeah, right. So
He
it's
attests that they married each other.
Right. That's what I thought, yeah. That's how I
Is that current law?
Yes.
About valid?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kathy.
So, from canonical form, we go to the word irregular. Latin for outside the rules. It's not the way we often use the word irregular. We use it for strange or, I don't want to get any more specific about irregularity. But in canon law, it means something very particular. Outside the rules. So an irregular marriage would be when a Catholic is in a marriage that is outside the rules. An irregular marriage is one that is prevented by a perpetual impediment. Now we know what perpetual is, ongoing for the long term. What's an impediment? An impediment is something which renders a person incapable of validly contracting marriage. So here's a list of the impediments acknowledged by the Catholic Church. Age. You're too young. What's the standard age? Any guesses?
In the United States?
In canon law.
21?
16 for males, 14 for females. You've got to think globally. I'm serious. You're thinking about modern Western society, but in some cultures still, the standards are very different. And the church has to think about all of her children. So that's the universal rule. There are different ages in different nations. The bishops can, I don't think they can lower those numbers, but they can raise them. Okay? Second impediment, impotence. Okay? You have to be able to complete the marital act. Marriage has to be consummated. Prior bond. You're already hitched to somebody else. You would think it's obvious, but none of these are here because they haven't been tried. Disparity of worship. That means we're dealing with a Catholic and a non-Christian. Sacred orders. You've been ordained, and you've made either a commitment to celibacy or to not marry again after your ordination. Religious public vow of chastity. You're a nun. You've publicly vowed chastity. Abduction. You kidnapped the bride.
That happens in a Sherlock Holmes story.
Sherlock Holmes.
They try that.
It's a real thing. It's not as common as it once was, thankfully, at least not in this part of the world, but it would invalidate marriage if the bride has been abducted. Interestingly, the law only provides for the abduction of brides, not the abduction of grooms. Just saying. The impediment of crime. This means something very particular. You killed the spouse of your intended so that they could marry you. Consanguinity. Your blood relatives.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there are different degrees. Please don't ask me to explain them because I always have to pull out the chart for this because I can't remember. But you cannot marry anybody in your direct line. You can't marry your parent or your grandparent or your child or your grandchild. Nobody in the direct line of your family tree, no. And then when you start branching out to cousins and stuff, I forget how many degrees of separation it has to be and how to count that. But just don't push it, okay? Affinity.
These are obviously rules before somebody gets married, but also if it was found out after the fact.
We can get there. Affinity. That means you're related to one another by marriage. My mother married your father. We're step siblings. We fall in love. What's wrong with that? Is that what I heard? Okay.
You're on camera.
And you've never met each other before that.
Well,
Yeah, again, we're going to circle back around to these things.
Yeah, I hope so.
Public propriety, which means you're kind of related through your unmarried parents. So my father and your mother take up together. They never actually get married, so there isn't a real legal bond there, but we grew up like brothers and sisters. We don't have common parents, but we might as well. That's an impediment. And then finally, adoption. So you can't marry an adopted child. A child adopted into the family is treated as a blood relative because of the nature of the relationships and the bonds that are formed. Okay, that's the list of impediments. Remember we talked early on about obligations and dispensations?
Yeah.
Some of those impediments can be dispensed. Some of them cannot be. Any guesses on what might make the difference? And it's not just the ick factor, although they're related. Because some of these impediments are a matter of divine and natural law. These are not laws the church made up. These are laws we received from God, and we don't get to change God's rules. So, impotence, prior bond, and consanguinity are all considered to be by divine natural law. It's built into our nature that marriage is not possible when these relationships already exist. All the others can be dispensed. And it depends on how serious the thing is, who can dispense it. So there was this, I saw the questions. So a Catholic marrying a non-Christian with the permission of the bishop. Related by marriage, but they didn't know each other. Or worse, imagine this. You're dating somebody, and while you're dating, your father meets his mother, and they fall in love, and they get hitched before you do. Now we can't get married. I think you could make a good argument for dispensation there. The same thing with the public propriety and all these sorts of things. The church is a good mother, and she's going to take into account all the facts. But she has to set some standards to begin with, and I think we can see why these all fit the thing. But even abduction and crime can be dispensed. Rare circumstances, and I think for crime, it has to go to the Pope.
Wouldn't some of these things be against the law in a country?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We're just talking
Or
within
a
the...
state even, like the
We're,
age thing.
yeah, we're talking just within the church
Okay.
system.
Well, that's even,
Any lingering questions on impediments?
Okay, the one against natural law, the impotence. So say soldier comes back paralyzed from the waist down, but still wants to marry, like, I've heard of like the Josephite marriage, is it still not a valid marriage?
The marriage has to be able to be
So
consummated.
it's not.
Now, I don't want to have to get into the details of what constitutes consummation, unless you really want to go there. The church has to set a minimum standard. Again, marriage has to be open to life. We went through, what the sexual act by its nature is, the unity of the spouses and the procreation of children. That doesn't mean every sexual act has to result in offspring. And impotence does not mean sterility. Those are different things. But in a human manner, both parties have to be able to commit the marital act with each other. And that's about as far as I want to go.
They've done away with the blood test, haven't they? When you want just to civil marriages.
As far as I know,
Yeah.
again,
So you wouldn't even
we
know
never
actually,
required them.
With all the DNA testing now, you wouldn't even know if you were like marrying your brother because he was conceived in another.
Well, I was going to say now with in vitro, it gets really weird.
Yeah.
So that comes back to the question of, well, what if there was an impediment but you didn't know? What if you didn't know he killed your first husband? I know, that's like Agatha Christie or something. Yeah.
Oh, man.
If the impediment was there and not dispensed, it invalidates the marriage. Once it's discovered, then we have to determine, do you want to get that marriage validated or not? Now, sometimes these things are discovered when someone comes looking to have an annulment announced, as we talked about last week. What makes it real easy if we find there was an impediment, and whew, as long as we can prove it. But more often than not, what happens is an impediment is discovered after the fact, but people really do want to be married. How do we fix this? So there's a few different ways to fix this, transforming an invalid marriage into a valid one.
What if they change their minds? Like, they go through all the things and it becomes valid and they're like, just kidding, now we're going to divorce. Can you, like, go
It's
back?
going to depend on how we tried to fix it.
Ah,
Seriously.
fixed it.
So, what we have, the general category is called convalidation. Now, most people will say this is about getting your marriage blessed. My blessing has nothing to do with it. Okay? We've already determined what makes a marriage. The exchange of consent between the two parties, as long as neither of them is bound by an impediment. Okay? So, there are a few different ways to deal with this. The first is called simple convalidation. That means the form was valid. They went through all the right hoops for the Catholic Church, but there was an impediment. Once the impediment has ceased or been dispensed, then their consent is renewed. Not a whole new wedding ceremony, but consent has to be renewed, at least by the party who was under the impediment. So you have to be able to say, I do, without being under the restriction. In some cases, you can say, I do, without the other one there or even knowing it. Really rare stuff, but it can happen. So that's a simple convalidation, a new act of the will consenting to the marriage. Then there's radical convalidation, meaning to the root. In this case, there was an impediment, or there wasn't even canonical form. They didn't get married within the visible bounds of the church. But one or both parties asks for a retroactive dispensation from either canonical form or the impediment. And that can only work if the consent they exchanged at the previously invalid ceremony perdures. That's something you only want to do if the marriage is strong, because there's no back door on this one. You've asked the church to go in and, on her own authority, solidify this. So, an example, real life example. Couple got married, he's Catholic, she's not. He never heard that the Catholic Church required Catholics to get married with a Catholic ceremony, or at least have permission to get married otherwise. Genuine ignorance of the whole thing, till his pastor says something from the pulpit, and that gets him thinking. Have I been married to my wife and had all these kids and raised them in the faith, and she comes to Mass with me, and our marriage isn't valid? Yep. What can we do? I would like to have my marriage valid. Well, how strong is your marriage? Oh, it's very strong. It's never been stronger. But I also know she'd really be hurt if the church said this wasn't real and made us go through another ceremony. We complete the necessary paperwork. The bishop grants the retroactive dispensation. And when his pen hits the paper, the dispensation for form shoots back, the 30 years, and their marriage is validated. It's a fiction of the law, but it's the way the church has determined to work on this. Their consent was real, and it perdures. So this is the church putting her seal of approval. I witness to this valid consent. But that's why you want to make sure it's a strong marriage, because if it later goes south and they come looking for an annulment, it's like,
That was our,
that was you?
yeah, I was Catholic, and I didn't know,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, because you could even have it, someone was baptized Catholic, didn't know they were baptized Catholic.
Validly.
Valid.
Yeah,
We presume it was valid.
validated.
Wasn't raised Catholic, but still is officially a Catholic, married outside the Catholic Church, only finds out they're Catholic later. Didn't know they had to follow this rule. The same route can be followed. But the consent has to be there, because the church can't just wave a magic wand and make it into a marriage if actually one of them said, no, I don't want to be your spouse. I've withdrawn my consent. Well, then there's nothing to validate. The final form is a new celebration of marriage. This is the easiest way. There was an impediment, it's not there anymore, or we can get it dispensed. You didn't know, we can have a simple ceremony, but we have a ceremony with the priest and the two witnesses and the exchange of consent, bada bing, bada boom. But again, there's the different ways to do it depending on the bigger picture you're dealing with. Sometimes, like for a radical convalidation, it could be done without the couple knowing it's been done. Father knew that there was, I don't know, pick an impediment, any impediment. Nah, that's a harder one to hide. But anyway,
Somebody stole somebody's duction.
he forgot to send in the dispensation paperwork to the bishop. And he only realizes it the day after the wedding when he's putting the file away. I've seen old versions of this in the files at the tribunal. The panicked letter from the priest. And the bishop saying, let's not disturb their consciences. I grant the dispensation. Fixed.
Bishop,
That's crazy.
good bishop.
And then if some reason that couple, that particular couple does want to split up or wants an annulment, then the dispensation's there, but they just.
The dispensation was there. They didn't know it was there.
Oh, that's right.
We'd have to find something else if there was something else wrong there, but.
Mistaken identity, like Mission Impossible, like not people, what happens, what's going on?
Yeah, that's more than an impediment.
Mission impossible.
So that would be grounds for an annulment. Error of person,
Again,
that's called. They're not the person you thought they were. And that can mean they are literally a different person, or they did such a good job of hiding who they really are intentionally that they deceived you into thinking they're someone different.
Say there's two people and they're on a desert island, nobody else is around, but they want to repopulate the island, so they want to get married. Would
the island. Father's so bad.
We've had to deal with this. This actually came up during COVID. We had lots of couples scheduled to have weddings. All of a sudden, we can't have the 5 people in a room it requires to have your wedding ceremony.
Oh, man.
Zoom.
We don't Zoom sacraments, sorry. So, canon law
Good old kid.
foresees these sorts of things because there could be any number of reasons. I don't know that wanting to repopulate the island would be considered sufficient cause, but I forget how long, if there's a period for the delay between when the couple decides they want to get married and the church being able to actually do it. And if that period of time elapses, they can exchange consent. But I think they still have to have a witness or two. Because again, the whole clandestine marriage thing just left a really bad taste in the church's mouth.
What if they populate the island and then they are the
On the island.
As long as they're not marrying their kids.
there you go.
With the
Well,
beach,
yeah.
with the beach ball on Castaway.
Can it sign a document saying it witnessed it?
Yeah.
One of the impediments is a prior bond.
Yes.
So how does the church, how do you as a priest deal with that prior bond? If they say, well, one of the people was married in a civil ceremony, they're divorced, is that when you go in and do?
We gotta do all our homework.
And if the Catholic, in that soon-to-be marriage, or says, well, then I'll just go a different route, they're obviously not being married because of that impediment.
If there was a Catholic who was previously married, but then married outside of the church,
Well, yeah.
yeah, that's definitely invalid.
What if they're Catholic in good standing, but they marry someone else who was married outside the church, but is not Catholic?
It depends. Who did they first marry?
Well, if you told them you need to investigate this marriage and they're like, forget it, we'll just go somewhere else.
Invalid by prior bond. We have to presume that every marriage is valid till we can prove otherwise. So, I'll give you a real life case. This is one I'm dealing with. So far, I've had to deal with the county clerk of San Diego and a private investigator. And we're just getting started. So, someone wants to get married in the Catholic Church and become a Catholic. Has been married before, twice. Both previous spouses were married before marrying this person. I need to find out the status of the previous marriages of the two spouses, hopefully to prove that they were validly married to somebody else in the eyes of the Catholic Church when they attempted to marry this person, to show that this person is free to get married in the Catholic Church. Now this is complicated enough if everybody's still in communication with one another and friendly. It's less so when they lost track of each other, and then when the private investigator helps you find them, the priest calls and they say, I want nothing to do with this. It's like, but you're my only hope. I feel like Princess Leia. Yeah, no, I don't want to be bothered, and don't call me again. So, Father gets creative. Father gets his free account on Ancestry.com.
That's awesome.
Father is able to track down the first marriage and the first divorce. I know when and where and who. So now I can contact the county clerk where the first marriage happened, and because these are public records, I can get a copy of the marriage record. I know now who did the wedding and where. Oh, look, it's in a church. Maybe the church has a record of this marriage and can tell me if either one of these people was Catholic. Hopefully not. Because if they're not Catholic, both of them, neither was bound to Catholic form, and any old wedding ceremony will do. We would recognize it as valid. This person wasn't free to marry the person I'm working with. I've taken care then of her first marriage. Then I get to start over with the second one. This is what I do on Mondays.
You and the elder Drew.
It's complicated sometimes.
Yeah, the elder Drew gets.
It's complicated.
Is two people coming to you, even if both of them are Catholic, is it an impediment if they're living together? I didn't hear you say that.
No,
Oh, yeah, living.
no. Bad idea, but not an
Right,
impediment.
that idea, but then it seems like it's given a lot of attention sometimes.
Father.
I'm not reading between the lines, so I'm not sure what you're saying.
I just heard of situations over the years where that was what was implied.
Because they're living together, they could not get married. Yeah, it's not the law of the church.
Okay.
Again, it's a bad idea,
Right.
and again, sometimes it's what's said and what's perceived are different in those conversations. Sometimes those conversations just don't go well. In general, if a priest is bringing it up at that point, it's because he really wants to see this marriage succeed, and saying, before you get off on the wrong foot, let me tell you what I know about these circumstances. Now, if you're already on a relationship with the church, that sounds like Father said we have to, or he's judging me, or all this sort of thing, when actually it's, I care about you, and I want this marriage to be real and long-lasting. But that's not what's heard. Or sometimes Father doesn't say it very well. So that's where it gets messy, but it's not an impediment.
But you as a priest could still say, well, I won't. And
He's not supposed to. If the couple is actually free to marry, and there are no impediments, and there's no clear reason why they shouldn't get married, they have a natural right to be married. Marriage is a natural institution before it's a sacramental institution.
But you don't ask them to separate until that marriage.
The priest could ask them to,
Because that's what I heard,
but that's not the law of the church.
but it's the
It's
priest.
just good practice.
It's a practice in some places. A bishop, I suppose, could put something out there, but it wouldn't turn it into an impediment. Whether it's a good idea to ask couples to do that or not, I've heard arguments in both directions. It might depend. Again, you got to look at the whole picture. Are we dealing with 2 young people and there are no kids? Or are we dealing with a family unit already? And we're asking the kids to have to choose. Those are very different circumstances. Ideally, just don't live together before you get married. Don't get the cart before the horse. And we don't have to have these uncomfortable conversations. But I can guarantee any priest who's doing that is because he cares about the couple, even if he doesn't express it well. You can find the stats. Divorce rates are already like 50-50.
Yeah.
They go off the charts if you've been living together before, which is the opposite of what you would think. But I see it all the time.
Yeah, Father, so living together basically is wrong. Right?
Basically, yes.
But I'm curious, because, why does it become commonplace? Because out there, it's commonplace.
Mhm.
Oh, living together, why don't we live together for?
No, we laid out those rules last week.
Yeah, I know some of them, I was wondering
Yeah.
where exactly.
That hasn't changed.
Exactly.
Again, natural law, divine law, we don't get to mess with those. Sex is for marriage.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Don't make me get any clearer.
This question's a lot less exciting. Old married couples, often on celebrating an anniversary or something, will come to the church and reaffirm their marriage vows. It's like, there's a term that they use, but anyway.
Renew their vows.
Renew, that's the word.
Yes.
Does that have any validity?
That's
Just for sentiment or what?
that is as precise an expression as get your marriage blessed. It's what everybody says, but it isn't what happens. They
But it
can
doesn't remove any of these other complications.
No. What the church provides in those moments is a blessing. If a couple comes on their anniversary, and we already know it's a valid marriage, then we would give them an anniversary blessing. Now that can include them making some statement about their undying love for each other, but that, the consent is there, it has perdured. I've seen it where, they turn to each other, I, John, take you, Sally, to be my wife. And it's like, she is your wife, there's no taking here. You took her as your wife 50 years ago. This doesn't even make sense.
that sounds good, though.
Yeah.
Another reason to get gifts.
So, well, again, should there be a celebration? Absolutely. When my parents celebrated their 50th anniversary,
Yeah.
back this past, well, I guess it's last spring now, we had a mass, and during the mass, we had the ceremony the church provides. They came forward in the middle of mass, they held hands, they gazed lovingly into each other's eyes. They made, there's some like brief line statement they make to each other, and then they say something together, and then I gave them a blessing. But it wasn't I, Joe, take you, Carol, because that's done. That's once. You're good. Unless, as we've seen, you're not, and then we gotta do it again.
Good.
Okay.
Very good.
Every time I think I'm sure, it turns out there's a desert island and someone wants to go there.
I like the desert island.
So I have one more word on the precepts, and it's probably the one that looks like the real outlier on your list. Catholic social teaching. It looks like Father just plunked this in here at the end because he didn't have a spot for it elsewhere, and that's not entirely true. Catholic social teaching is a very important department, if you will, of Catholic doctrine. And many people would hear it and think, oh, that's social justice with a Catholic spin. And that would be to do a real disservice to this area of the Church's teaching. It's the doctrine of the Church and her moral judgment on economic and social matters, and really the intersection of those two things. And a little history behind it helps us understand what it is and why I put it in here. The Church's social teaching really took off in the 19th century under Pope Leo XIII, who was responding to the industrial age. Economics were changing fast, and with it, society was changing fast. You go from a basically agrarian small town setup where the family is together all the time, working together, learning together, spending all their time together, to now mom and dad are off at factories, the kids are in the school, and they get a few hours together before they go to bed. The whole shape of society and culture gets turned topsy-turvy. There's a new concept of society. You end up with new concepts of the state and its authority, because, as usual, the government wants to come in and regulate everything. You have new forms of labor, and you have new forms of ownership. You're not working for yourself anymore. All kinds of issues start to spring up, and the Church, through the Pope, begins to address these issues. What's at the heart of what the Church teaches in this area? That human beings are themselves the author, center, and goal of all economic and social life. And the human person has a God-given dignity and is called to communion. We are not made just for ourselves. We are here to be connected with others. Therefore, social relationships must not be determined entirely by economic factors. The rules running society must be more than dollars and cents. To do otherwise is against human nature. Profit must not be the exclusive norm or ultimate end. The basic rights of individuals and groups must not be subordinated to the collective. Persons are not just a means to profit. They're not just cogs in a machine. The reasonable regulation of the economy with justice and for the common good is commendable, but not solely by centralized planning, where all the power is in one or a very small group of people, or simply by the law of the marketplace, supply and demand. Work is of value because human beings are its author and its beneficiary. Authentic development in society concerns the whole person and is meant to increase his or her ability to answer the call of God. Those are big concepts. but there's stuff that doesn't really get talked about in modern social policies or economics. Why do I mention this here? We can think that the church's social and economic teaching is mostly a matter about workers' rights and establishing a welfare system, because that's where social justice goes to in our minds. But what the church comes at this with a unified worldview, with marriage and family and a state which supports them as the cornerstone of every stable and virtuous society. That used to be the basic policy of economics in the Western world, but we're seeing policies that work in the exact opposite direction these days, and we're watching marriage and family suffer for it. So that's why I sneak it in here under you should obey the church's laws on marriage. Why does the church have laws on marriage? Because there's nothing more basic to human society than the flourishing of marriage. Because that's how we bring new generations into the world, and that's how we spread the faith. And that's why the church has a stake in modern economics and social theory. Again, it's not where most people's brains would go if you hear Catholic social teaching, but most of the Catholic social teaching is about a living wage to support one's family, rights of parents, appropriate time for rest and recreation so parents and children can have time to get these sorts of things, not unionize or any of the other, catchwords that are floating around. So that's why I snuck that in there. If you want to learn more about that, this is a truly excellent book, Reclaiming Catholic Social Teaching, A Defense of the Church's True Teachings on Marriage, Family, and the State by Anthony Esselin. Not a long book, but it's a quick tour, especially through the teaching of Pope Leo XIII, and just some beautiful stuff on the family and why it matters and why work matters and how we need to work in a truly human way. All right, that's the end of the precepts. Do we want the two last words?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll do my
Go for it.
best to be quick. So, the last words from 2 weeks ago. So this was the evening we were talking about liturgy and worship, were the words participation and reverence. This will probably be the most controversial stuff I talk about in 6 weeks. So here's the fireworks for your grand finale.
Fireworks, uh-oh.
These two words come to mind for me when I consider the two forms of the Mass in the Roman Church. What you call them, extraordinary form, ordinary form, now that we know what extraordinary and ordinary mean and don't mean. Or the Old Latin Mass, the Mass of Vatican II, Novus Ordo, whatever. There's all these different names. But when I consider what I hear from people who are attached to either form of the Mass, the thing they value most in the Mass since Vatican II is participation. And the thing they value most in the Mass before Vatican II is reverence. And I want to spend a few minutes tonight looking at what those two words actually mean versus how we often use them, and to show that we're really not terribly far apart. Does that sound like a reasonable itinerary?
Yeah.
So participation. Latin means it's two things: to grasp and a division. You put those things together and you get to take part. Participation means to take part. At Vatican II, the very first document the bishops put out was on the liturgy in 1964. And one of the most quoted parts of that document was this paragraph, part of paragraph 14. Mother Church earnestly desires that all the faithful should be led to that fully conscious and active participation in liturgical celebrations which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. Such participation by the Christian people is their right and duty by reason of their baptism. In the restoration and promotion of the sacred liturgy, this full and active participation by all the people is the aim to be considered before all else. For it is the primary and indispensable source from which the faithful are to derive the true Christian spirit. Pretty strong statement. We're about to make some changes, and participation is why. It would be helpful to know what the church means by participation. What would the average Catholic think participation at Mass means? You don't have to speak for yourself. You can speak for someone you know. What does it mean to participate at Mass?
Responding to the responsorial song.
Okay.
Singing along.
Singing, responding.
We were praying.
Worship.
Extraordinary ministers.
Okay, so fulfilling certain roles, receiving communion, I'm
Yes,
assuming.
yeah.
No, I don't like to take anything for
Telepathy from Mars.
Mark,
community.
I like that.
Okay, so
Offer yourself.
offer yourself. By and large, what I'm hearing are having things to do, right? Which the word active participation would spark in one's mind. Well, where does this expression come from? First, it's very important to point out this was not something invented at Vatican II. Prior to Vatican II, Pope Pius XII used the expression in 1947 when he said, "This active and individual participation, the members of the head and the mystical body become more daily like their divine head." It was a letter on the liturgy. He was saying we need to aim for active and individual participation. Now, Pius XII didn't invent this in 1947 because Pius XI in 1928 had said, "The faithful come to church in order to derive piety from its chief source by taking an active part in the venerated mysteries and the public solemn prayers of the church. In order that the faithful may more actively participate in divine worship," here's what he suggests, "let them be once more to sing the Gregorian chant, so far as it belongs to them to take part in it." Didn't see that one coming, did you? But Pius XI wasn't the first one to say this. Pius X in 1903, writing on sacred music, says that the liturgy that people will pick up the true Christian spirit from the liturgy through their active participation in the most holy mysteries. He's saying that we should make a special effort to restore the use of Gregorian chant by the people so that the faithful may again take a more active part. So the language is not new, but it's clear it's coming from a different place than the average person is understanding it. And part of that is a translational problem. If we were talking about active participation, the Latin from Vatican II would say participatio activa. Now, you don't need to know Latin to figure out what that means. But what the Latin actually says is participatio actuosa. It's not activa. What does actuosa mean? Actual. Actual participation is the language coming from all of these popes. And what's the difference between something that is activa and actuosa? Activa is an exterior thing. Actuosa is an interior thing. And so what the bishops at Vatican II were saying, this is not about giving everybody something to do. What the popes have been after us for a century to do is to allow Christ to do the acting in, on, and through us. And any changes we make are meant to foster that. It's not about, hey, everybody get busy. It's about, hey, everybody, Christ is getting busy. and make sure you're ready to let him actualize that in you. Kind of different, right? The Second Vatican Council says, in order that the liturgy may be able to produce its full effects, it is necessary that the faithful come to it with proper dispositions, that their minds should be attuned to their voices, and that they should cooperate with divine grace, lest they receive in vain. That's what active participation is supposed to look like. Now on to reverence. What does the word reverence mean? From the Latin, to stand in awe or fear of. So reverence is honor, respect, deference. It's part of the virtue of religion, the inclination to show honor or respect toward any person, place, or object related to God. Father Romano Guardini in 1963 said, reverence is a surmise of greatness and holiness and a desire to participate in it, combined with the apprehension of being unworthy of it. I'm going to repeat that because there's a lot going on there. It's a surmise of greatness and holiness and a desire to participate in it, combined with the apprehension of being unworthy of it. Alice von Hildebrand, who was I could say she was a philosopher, married to a philosopher, Catholic thinker and writer. Her husband stood up to Hitler and had to flee Germany. They lived in exile pretty much the rest of their lives. I think they both died here in the United States. Yeah, they were both pretty awesome, super smart. She wrote an essay in 2016 that included a beautiful section on reverence. Plato seems to be addressing the 21st century. Irreverence will be your downfall. Plato saw clearly that reverence is a key virtue. Dietrich von Hildebrand, that's her husband, and I love how she always calls him by his full name. Dietrich calls it the mother of all virtues, because none of them can possibly blossom without being animated by a feeling of awe for the greatness of creation, a creation that clearly points to a creator. Reverence is the virtue reminding us constantly that we are creatures, that everything is a gift calling for gratitude toward the gift giver. Reverence opens our eyes to the mystery of being, of life, of beauty. The curse of modern man is that so many of them have lost their sense of wondering and gratitude. Boredom is a punishment for irreverence. Alas, our mind-boggling technological progress has brought with it the curse of taking things for granted and assuming with blind stupidity that there is nothing we cannot know, nothing that we cannot master. Having a small gadget in his hand, one feels that he is the master of the universe. What is reverence? It is an uplifting and joyful feeling of awe, a response that man is called upon to give to God's creation, which clearly points to the Creator. It is an ever-renewed and grateful discovery of the mysteries of being. It is an overcoming of one's moral blindness, preventing us perceiving the glories of the universe that we live in. Man is made up of body and soul, and it is dignum et justum, right and just, that the body in harmony with the soul should express its trembling reverence toward the body of Christ present in the Eucharist. If any one of us were blessed with a divine apparition, the first thing we would do would be to kneel in trembling adoration. How right Chesterton was when he wrote that modern man forgets how tall he is on his knees. Any religious revival should begin with a reawakening of our sense of wondering, awe, trembling reverence for the sacred and whatever is greater than we are. Now, I forgot to ask the question, what does the average Catholic in the pew think of when we talk about reverence? Not anybody here, of course.
No,
You've heard people say,
What she said.
no, that's not what I hear.
Uh-oh.
The priest genuflects more at the Latin Mass. Oh, the incense seems more reverent. Everybody's so quiet. The music is more recollected. These are the sorts of things that I usually hear. What's fascinating is people attached to either Mass
Yeah.
are occupied with the things happening on the outside. See what I'm saying? When we're both trying, or should be trying, to reach the same thing happening on the inside. And that's the real poverty we face in the church. Reverence and participation are not at odds with each other, as Father Guardini makes very clear. In the church's mind, they're the same thing. I want to take part in that which is so far beyond me, and for which I know I'm not worthy. So it brings me to my knees. It doesn't have to be the way it is in the church, if we remember where it's all supposed to be going.
Yeah.
Now for the stunning finale.
Finale.
This was written in the summer of 1965 by one of the bishops who was at the Second Vatican Council and who voted for the changes in the liturgy. There was something to reform and to rediscover. Clearly, the first part of the Mass, which is intended to instruct the faithful and for them to express their faith, needed to reach those ends in a clearer and, so to speak, more intelligible manner. In my humble opinion, two such reforms seemed useful. First, the rites of that first part of the Mass, and also a few translations into the vernacular. The priest coming nearer to the faithful, communicating with them, praying and singing with them, and therefore standing at the pulpit, saying the collect, the epistle, and the gospel in their language. The priest singing in the traditional melodies, the Kyrie, the Glory, the Creed, with the faithful. These are so many good reforms that give back to that part of the Mass its true finality. Words written by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, the founder of the Society of St. Pius X, and the one who fought so hard years later for the traditional Latin Mass. Gives you something to think about, doesn't it? The danger is always that we get so taken in by the externals that they fail to work their way in. And whether the externals are ancient or modern, the danger is the same. We should all want reverence, and we should all want good participation, because this is the heart of what we do. So we shouldn't fear change, nor should we fear our past. That's how I think we can live better as the church in the here and now. So there's your last words. There's my surprise ending. Happy Holy Week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.